Haunting on Highway 206, written by Red Plaid Hat. I grew up in a rural town in northwest Montana. I've lived there all my life, and it's where I plan on living out the rest of it. I work at a lumber mill that is being run into the ground by a faceless corporation, just like the rest of blue-collar America. I'm surrounded by forest and farms, rivers, mountains, everything you would expect from a place called the last best place. We've got our problems. People just don't see them. People don't see it because they don't want to. They don't want to talk about the hauntings on Highway 206. Everyone who went to school here knows the stories. Folk tales and urban legends that crop up during late-night sleepovers and campouts. It always starts with a, "Did you hear about Johnny Brown?" or, "My sister's friend's cousin told her." It's a way of helping cope with the reality of where we live. Make up a story so we don't have to acknowledge the truth. But I'm not for that anymore, and I'm here to lay down the truth because Bill Sorensen does not deserve how the news is painting him. He didn't hurt those kids. Something else did. Every winter, Bill and I did our neighborly duty, and we'd dig out the houses off of Highway 206 with our plows. We don't charge anything, but maybe a hot cup of coffee. And the folks who need it can call Bill or me to get on the list. The county does not care all that much about the residential roads. Or if they do, they have a funny way of showing it by stacking snow 20 feet high in front of driveways and trapping the elderly. So, as we have done 2 to 3 times a week every winter for the past 15 years, Bill and I go out that night. We have some coffee and breakfast at a little cafe in town and then get to work. We've seen a lot of weird stuff. Animal carcasses, wrecks of cars that have been abandoned, the random shoe. But it was that particular early morning that the hairs on my neck wouldn't relax. I kept feeling like something was following me. And when Bill and I met up at Gold Ammo for our break, he said that he felt something too. I laughed that maybe the sleepless nights were getting to me. And Bill's face cracked into what was about to be a laugh when he coughed through his coffee and pointed. A woman wearing nothing but a nightgown and slippers was walking down the highway, the shuffle of her steps cutting through the stiff, dark air. Her dress whipped around her in a wind that I couldn't feel, but sent a shiver through me somehow regardless. Bill said he was going to ask if she needed help, and before I could protest, he was on his way over to her. His words were a whisper to me, and the woman just looked at him and smiled, touching his face. She had perfect brown curls and her lips were so red. I don't know if it was because she was on a backdrop of snow coupled with the fact that she was incredibly pale, but her lips were striking. I blinked and she was gone, and Bill was sitting motionless on his ATV. I called out to him, and it was only when I made my way over to him and touched his arm that he moved. He jumped, actually. Like he hadn't realized that I had driven over to him at all, and almost like he had forgotten where he was. He didn't say anything the rest of the time that we were out, and after plowing the last driveway on our list, went home with a meager grunt. I had only been asleep for a few hours when my phone started ringing. Catherine kicked me under the sheets and mumbled something about killing my boss before rolling over and going back to sleep. I got up and went to the kitchen to answer the phone, noting that it had started to snow again as I looked out the living room window. And then something stopped me. Something that brought the hairs on the back of my neck back up and sent that same shiver through my body. Bill stood on my porch. Dark stains covered his winter jacket. I didn't take my eyes off him as I made my way to the phone. Bill's voice came through the receiver. A feat that shouldn't have been possible as I was staring straight at him through the window, and he had no mobile phone.
"They're all dead, Mike. They're dead."
The call suddenly ended in a busy signal. Bill was gone, and when I checked, there were no footprints outside the house. I immediately called Dave, our local sheriff. He sent a car out to check on Bill. He called me back an hour later, doing what he could to remain professional before breaking down. He told me that Bill was dead and that there were a few suspicious things at his house, asking between deep breaths if I could come down to the station to talk. 40 minutes later, I learned what they had found. Bill's body had just been sitting in his living room with the television on, dressed as he had been when we'd gone out, a huge smile across his face. The preliminary report suggested that it was a stroke, but it didn't explain the amount of blood that they'd found on him, none of which tested as his. It wasn't until the spring that they found the bodies. Several teenage boys who were thought to have run away were found in a ditch outside of Bill's house. The melt and freeze of winter had encased them in ice, preserving their dismembered remains. The blood on his clothes matched theirs, and their deaths were ruled a homicide. It took longer to find the body of the woman. She had been dumped along the side of the river that runs back along the 206. Most of the DNA evidence had been washed away, but there was some skin recovered from underneath her fingernails, and though most of it had disappeared during the thaw, there was evidence of sexual assault. Dave wasn't supposed to let me see her, but I asked so that I could deal with the curiosity that had been lingering in my gut. When the coroner pulled back the sheet, I knew that it was true. Nature had been harsh on her, but it was the same woman who had been walking down the highway. What had been perfect curls was now just a darkened mat against her head, and some birds and animals had made a meal out of certain parts of her body. But it was her. That was when I came clean to Dave and told him what Bill and I had seen that night. How we had watched that woman walk along the 206 in her slippers. He didn't want to hear it and dismissed what I was saying. Said that I should keep my mouth shut if I knew it was good for me, and that I was too old to be spreading ghost stories. I think that he's just in denial, and I'm going to prove that Bill is innocent when I show him. The first snow came early this year, and I've got driveways to plow. But I've called Dave to meet me at Gold Ammo. He needs to see her with his own eyes. He needs to see the woman who haunts Highway 206.